I don't actually start by concepting a new game. I read a lot. I like learning new things. And at some point, I'll just trip over a subject or some material that I find particularly fascinating. So it's not like I sit down and say, okay, I'm going to come up with a new game idea. It's more like I'm kind of just exploring, browsing the world. Then it's like, ooh, maybe I can make a game out of this. When I went to college, I studied all these different things, and I don't want to become an architect or an engineer or an artist. And by being a game designer, I found that I could study whatever I want. And my excuse is I'm making a game about it. So for me, being a game designer, turned into a lifelong learning process where I can go off in any subject I want to, and it's tax deductible. For me, it's usually some kind of interesting thing about the world or in the world that as I dig deeper, it gets more interesting. Not less. That didn't sound that interesting to me, but as I read about it a little bit more, it actually sounded kind of fascinating. I read some more, and it actually really grabbed me and pulled me in. A lot of the games I've done actually were based upon cool subjects, usually books that I read. SimCity, was very influenced by the work of a guy named Jay Forrester, who was the first person to actually model cities on the early computers back in the 50s. His models were not spatial, they were just like little numbers. How many people did the city have? How much land, how many roads, But he was actually the father of what became known as system dynamics, which I'll talk about a little bit later. SimAnt was very much inspired by the work of Edward O. Wilson, very famous myrmecologist, studies ants. He wrote this great book, won the Pulitzer Prize, called The Ants, but he actually, in some sense, was reverse engineering the way ants work. Little ants are almost like little robots, and it's pretty simple to figure out in the presence of this pheromone, the ant does that. In the presence of that pheromone, it does this. And so he actually reverse engineered that and discovered a whole level of emergence. An ant colony, in fact, is incredibly smart. It's about as smart as a dog. An individual ant is incredibly stupid. And so ant colonies are really one of the few forms of intelligence that we can deconstruct and understand at that level. And he was the guy who did it. These kind of subjects are things that when you read about them, they're kind of dry and boring. They're filled with technical jargon. And what I always aspired to do was to take these things and make them approachable, turn them into a toy. How can I turn an ant colony into a toy? So other people come in and start interacting with it. And when players are actually manipulating these things and building them, they take ownership and they get so involved, so much more emotionally connected to these. And then the subject becomes utterly fascinating. As soon as I built the very first prototypes of SimCity, and I was running a little simulation, it was very coarse, very crude, but still my interest in urban planning skyrocketed. All of a sudden, oh, this is really cool. I want to find out about traffic modeling. I want to find out about this, that, and the other. These things that would have sounded incredibly boring to me when I had a little, guinea pig in my room to play with became fascinating. Likewise, other games I did, The Sims was very much influenced by Christopher Alexander's work in architecture. So for me personally, I find a lot of inspiration in books, also in fields I think that are interdisciplinary, or things that are almost controversial. Sim Earth was very much inspired by James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis. It's about the Earth and the way it regulates itself. And, usually that's where the areas of science are moving the fastest and the most interesting. And those are the things I tended to gravitate toward. But this is me personally as a designer. I think every designer is going to find their own kind of palette of inspiration, their own direction, their own kind of voice. When I was starting out in game design, there wasn't this thing around called the internet. And actually I had to go to this place they used to call libraries, where they had these things called books. And I would read these books, and learn about things that way. Nowadays, it's so low friction to go on the web and find anything you want to, anything at all, about anything you want to. So I think that now designers, have so much more, so much less friction, to do research around an idea that, for me, it's almost magical. That I can kind of pick any topic and go down any little weird path and find material about it. On the simulation side, it was really interesting to me to kind of go back into the history of simulation, back into the 60s and 50s and even all the way back to von Neumann and Turing, and see what they were trying to do with these super primitive computers. And some of the things they were trying to do were amazing, way, way beyond anything a computer could do, but you could imagine that one day a computer could do this. And right now, my watch has, much more power than they ever envisioned. At least as a designer, I don't feel like there are any meaningful limitations beyond my own imagination. And so I think to me that's, really the thing that, I have to kind of flex and exercise and push is my own imagination. If I can do that, it's actually pretty straightforward and easy for me to figure out, the research, the technology, to do it. It feels to me like so many designers always think about and even communicate their game idea relative to other games. You know, it's going to be World of Warcraft on the moon. It's going to be whatever. Uh, I think that, there's so much more opportunity out in the world to take things. You can just take a rock off the ground and look at it the right way. And it has little microbes competing on the surface for territory, and there's sunlight and environmental consideration. You could turn that into something fascinating. You can take almost anything and looking at it the right way, make it a fascinating interactive experience. With The Sims, it wasn't really apparent what I should be researching. But as I started digging into the game design, we started getting into the thing with the Sims motives and they had to go to work and all this stuff. It became pretty apparent that this is really kind of a game about time management in some sense on their side. How do you manage their time to maximize their motives, to make them happy? And after quite a bit of digging, I came across the work of a guy named, I think, James Robinson. And he did all these time studies of Americans, how they spent their time. And he actually kept logs every day. They spent 20 minutes of time, doing their stuff in the morning to get ready, this amount of time with their kids, this amount of time in front of TV, and he actually broke it down. And it ended up that we were matching those numbers fairly closely. We took the simulation and tried to match the real numbers, the percentage of time that people actually spend doing each of these activities in The Sims. So that was something that wasn't apparent that, something we could even research. Another area of research, I forgot the name of the guy who did this, but he was interviewing all these people about what their most prized possessions were at different ages. And it was actually quite interesting stuff, some of which kind of made it into the game, some of which didn't. It turned out that, like, for kids and really old people, their most prized possession was their bed, And in midlife, and TV was second. Midlife, it was like their car, their house, all these other things. But it was interesting that the kids' list of their top possessions was almost the same as like an elderly person's top possessions. But so some of this stuff will kind of become part of the game or not. But still, as a designer, if you kind of understand and absorb all this stuff, it helps you kind of think about directions you might take it, or you could take it, even if you don't end up using it. Even when I'm kind of initially imagining, okay, I'm going to make a game about this thing, I don't start by thinking, what's the game going to be, or what's the game going to be like? I just dive deeper and deeper into the subject and the research. And then I start trying to kind of look at the components, what are the different aspects of this that are interesting to me? And it might be the process, it might be the structure, it might be the science behind it, whatever. Historical context. From those things, I start imagining, okay, how would I really like to kind of view this or manipulate it or play with it or create it? If this is a piece of clay, how do I want to sculpt it? What are my tools? I start just imagining 10 or 20 different perspectives on that subject. And I think the perspectives are far more valuable than particular solutions or approaches. And so actually, after kind of rotating this thing around through 20 or 30 perspectives, 2 or 3 usually will start to kind of get traction in my head. And I'll start exploring those a little bit further. So I'm trying to describe something that in my head is really a much more kind of abstract process, but that's how it kind of feels to me. But in some sense, I'm kind of circling the idea and slowly zeroing in on it. I don't dive right at it. But I sit there and just kind of let it turn over my mind. I'll sit there and do like this research, thinking about it for a year before I even think about what kind of game it might be. And during that time, I will even, I'll build models of it or draw pictures of it or try to recreate it in different forms tangibly. And that, again, just kind of puts my brain a little bit different spin, a little bit different perspective, and new ideas will pop up, just as a result of me building a model of something. Spore, the original concept was based on a couple of things. I did a box design, original box design. It was actually, I called it Sim Everything. But there were two things that really fascinated me especially. Number one was old film, Charles and Eames' Powers of 10.
We begin with a scene 1 meter wide. Now, every 10 seconds, we will look from 10 times farther away, and our field of view will be 10 times wider.
It was the same thing, starting with atomic scale, every one, a powers of 10, bigger and bigger and bigger. I love that idea of scale across the galaxy, across the universe. And within that dimension of scale, that the most interesting thing at every single scale that we know of is life. You know, everything else is fairly deterministic, fairly, predictable, dry, but life is the one unpredictable aspect at every single scale, starting at the cellular level. The other big inspiration was basically astrobiology, the idea of, how prevalent is life out in the galaxy and what forms might it take. And so it was those two ideas that came together, and I, was really thinking about, can I tell a story about the journey of life from the cellular level up to, galactic expansion, and make that kind of game-like, like a toy. As a designer, I tend to go with my gut feel in terms of that's going to be something cool. And I can't always, express exactly on what dimensions it's going to be cool, but I hope that my instincts will bring me to a place where a wide range of people will enjoy it. And I wasn't always that way. It took me a while to kind of, to realize that. When I was first working on SimCity by myself, I showed it to a few people and they thought it was kind of cool. I showed it to my eventual partner, Jeff Braun, and he was like, oh yes, we have to do this. Let's start a company. We started Maxis and did SimCity. But in my mind, even at that point, I was thinking, okay, this is a game that maybe a few strategy gamers or architects maybe might enjoy. It didn't occur to me that a wide range of people would enjoy that. To Jeff, it did. Jeff kind of understood that, I think, more than I did. After that, I started learning to trust my instincts, that if I really find this cool for some reason, I'm gravitating toward that, just trust that we can find a way to bring other people and they'll enjoy it as well. It's very hard as a designer for me to design for somebody else. This is how that person thinks. This is what they want. This is what they believe. It's easy to do it for myself and then figure out, why am I enjoying this? Why am I motivated? And, what about other people's thought process will let them see this and enjoy it and experience it the same way I do?